Cool. And this may be time for the big question, which is why perennials? I mean, I think most people listening will know what a perennial is. Every other grain that I know of out there is an annual. It's grown. It completes its life cycle in 1 year, one crop. But a perennial would live for multiple years and multiple crops. So I guess it's a two-part question. Why are there no other perennial grains, and why is it important that we try to make them exist in the world?
When we think about within agriculture, but also within urban planning and in all the places where humans operate, we use perennials in buffer strips as erosion control, as way to filter water, as ways to accomplish all these really critical sort of ecosystem functions that make sure that humans, us, have access to clean air, clean water, good soil to continue growing things into the future. Those are sort of like the basic public goods that we might say all humanity should have access to. And perennials do that better than annuals. If you look at natural ecosystems almost anywhere on the planet, and if you remember back to your high school science class, you learned about something called secondary succession, where you had some event happen. There was a volcano that erupted or a landslide. And the first things that came in, those are annual plants that quickly try to stabilize as much of the soil as possible. But they don't do it as well as these sort of long-lived perennial species that gradually move in through this successional process to what becomes a climax community. Those are forests, those are prairies. Those places are usually dominated by perennial diverse systems. And we want to recreate that in agriculture. We don't have that necessarily in agriculture right now outside of planting waterways and fields to reduce erosion or planting that buffer strips along sort of rivers and creeks and things like that. So we want to be able to produce grain, crops like that, and use the crops themselves to accomplish both sort of the productivity goals that we have. We want to have high yields of grain that can be fed to humans or used in other purposes, while also accomplishing sort of the conservation goals that we have as humanity as we move forward with the same exact species. When we look at the best examples of maybe conservation in an agriculture setting, we often think of the conservation reserve program, the CRP program, where lots of agricultural cropland has been taken out of production. And what do they plant it to? They plant it to mixtures of native, sometimes non-native perennial species that do an excellent job holding the soil in place, building back that soil organic matter, filtering water, etc. So we want to mimic the CRP plantings, but while producing a grain crop. The next question, if you want me to answer it, I think is much harder, and it's probably just a hypothesis or a guess. But when you do breeding or domestication, so all the species that we grow, corn, wheat, they've all been domesticated through selection by humans over time. And selection with an annual has to happen every year, right? Every year, the plant, you're harvesting the seed, it dies, and you're going to replant seed the next year. So you're kind of going through this natural selection process with the plants, domesticating the humans and the plants together. With perennials, you don't get any of that selection that might result in higher yields in a sort of historic setting where humans might just be coming and harvesting seed from the plants and returning to the same spot every year. So you never really got to go through this replanting, artificial selection for better traits multiple times. Over 10,000 years, you can imagine how many times we did that with wheat, lentils, etc.